I'm glad to have you all here and getting started. Okay. Okay. So once again, I would like to extend my appreciation to everyone for making up time to join us here. And once again, good morning and good afternoon and evening from wherever you are joining from. Welcome to today's panel discussion, hosted by Internet Society Online Safety SIG. My name is Godsway Kubi, and I'm going to be your moderator for this important conversation on encryption and online safety. So a brief about the Internet Society Online Safety SIG. We are dedicated to promote we are dedicated to promoting and advocating for safer and more inclusive, uh, more secure online environment for individuals worldwide. We are also committed to principles of digital rights, privacy, inclusivity, and also our SIG endeavors to address the multi-phase challenges, posed by ever-evolving digital landscape. So I would like to just run a quick poll. This session, we have two segments in this session. Well, the first segment will give us the contextual overview of the whole issue about the UK mandates demanded from Apple, and the other one will dive deeper into getting insights from our speakers. So before we get started, I'd just like to know your thoughts. I'd just like to know if you are aware of the trending issue or not, and how you see, what you think government should have. Do you think government should have the power or the mandates to request for backdoors? So please, the poll is up now. I would just like to see your view. Let's quickly run that before we get started, please. And also, as the poll is going on, kindly feel free to always to comment in the chat where you are joining from and what your expectations are. Let's connect as well. So we have, I think, 3 minutes to just quickly run this poll. And this poll will give us the insights whether we should take care of segment one, or we should just quickly jump to our panelists to get insights from them. So please, your response are needed for this poll. Okay. Thank you so much. Let's keep coming. We have 1 minute more to end the poll. We have a few seconds more to end the poll. The poll is up. Let's keep chatting let's keep putting our comments in the chat where you are joining from. Connect with somebody. You can share your LinkedIn handles. Let's get connected. It's a connected world, and as Internet Society always says, connecting the unconnected. So let's get connected as well. Okay, I can see the first question, that is if, yes, I think a number of people are aware of the trending issue, and a lot are also aware, but does not have much details. And also, I think about 7 people, or 25%, is not aware, is new to this particular issue. Then the second question, which talks about, do you think government should have the power to mandate backdoors? Yeah, some say yes, it's necessary for national security. Some say no, it compromises. Wow, interesting. Those who said yes, I think they could. I would like that at the Q&A section, you could give us your views on that as well. Okay, fast forward. Thank you so much for taking up this poll. I'll be ending this now. Okay, so the result of the poll is up, and just to get insights from people. Okay, so before we start, please, if you have any question or comments to make, please feel free to make it in the chat, or also hold on, and when it's time for Q&A, you can just raise your hand, and when you are called upon, you speak. Thank you so much. So as we may know, the UK government has issued, a technical capability notice. That is the short form is the TNC, to Apple. That is essential demand. They are demanding for the creation of backdoors into its end-to-end encrypted cloud services. So today we are gathered here with some panel of experts to break down the implications of this mandate, to discuss its global impact and also to look at or to explore how we can advocate for, a strong encryption. So before we dive deeper into it, let's just quickly have an introduction of our panelists. Okay, so first on the list, we have Mr. Charles Mock. He's a researcher at the Global Digital Policy Incubator of the Cyber Policy Center at Stanford University, and a member of the Board of Trustees of Internet Society. And he's also a member of International Center for Trade, Transparency, and Monitoring. I think Charles served as an elected member for Legislative Council in Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, representing the Information Technology Functional Constituency, for 2 terms from 2012 to 2021. And he also in 2021, he founded Tech for Good Asia, an initiative to advocate positive use of technology for businesses and civil communities. He's also an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, Charles co-founded,
Enough.
I wanted to, okay, so I finally said enough. So that's a brief about Charles. And thank you so much, Charles, for making up time to join us here. We really appreciate having you here. And also second on the list, we have Callum Voge. I know Callum will say enough, so let me just read a brief. So Callum is the Director for Government Affairs and Advocacy in Internet Society. He joined in 2021, July. In his role, he tracks and analyzes incoming legislation to understand how it may positively or negatively impact the internet and use this information to advocate change. So I think that is a brief also about Callum Park. Thank you so much for joining us here. We're happy to have you. And also, I think we have our third female speaker we have here is Farzaneh. Farzaneh is a founder of Digital Medusa, a tech governance research firm. Prior to that, she was the director of social media governance initiative at Yale Law School. So between 2017 and 2019, she served as a executive director of Internet Governance Projects, Georgia Tech. She received her PhD from University Hamburg, Institute of Law and Economics. So Farzaneh's current research interests, revolve around internet infrastructure, social media governance, trust and safety, and online disputes, So Farzaneh, we are happy to have you here and thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so briefly, let's quickly look at, so like I mentioned earlier, as on the poll, we have individuals saying that they have idea about the issues of UK mandates to Apple. And also the second one, individuals were like, it's a good idea that UK government is requesting for backdoor access. We are going to dive deep into that. So let's just briefly look at the context of how this happened or how it started. So the UK Technical, Capability Notice, that is basically the TCN. It's just a legal mechanism under the Investigatory Powers Act 2016. And this allows governments to secretly compel tech companies to modify their services, in a way that enables surveillance. So in this case, reports indicate that Apple has been ordered to weaken its, end-to-end encryption on iCloud services, effectively creating a backdoor that could grant access to user data. You could imagine how this would be. So for those unfamiliar with this end-to-end encryption, it's just basically, it ensures that only the sender and the recipients of the message can read its content, no third party. So not even the service provider has access to it. So this guarantees privacy and security for users and also preventing unauthorized access from hackers, corporations, and also, governments as well, like what is happening. So it's preventing government from having access to the data. So now let's quickly look at why the encryption matters for online safety. So encryption is just, a feature. It's a fundamental pillar of online safety. Every day, billions of people rely on encryption to protect their personal data, financial transactions, medical records, and even critical business operations. Because as it stands today, if you are having access or if you are transacting on a platform which is not really encrypted, we are always worried and concerned about that. So I think it's playing a major role. So without a strong encryption, all of this is at risk. So let's quickly just look at a brief on some of the global implications for cybersecurity, human rights, and freedom of expression. So the UK move does not exist in isolation. If Apple complies, it could set a dangerous global precedent where other countries may also demand same access for user data. So that is why we need to really stand against that, because it trigger a race to the bottom in terms of privacy and security protection. Yeah, so I think that is a brief about the whole concept, and you could read more. I'll be sharing some links online as well, or maybe in the chat as time goes on, so you could basically read more. But in the meantime, our dear speakers and panelists will be diving deeper into it. So now that we've established the context, and also the importance of encryption and the global stakes, we will move into our panel discussion, where we will share insights and also we look at some pressing issues. So thank you for listening. And also I'll humbly like to, so Mr. Charles, I think if you could briefly just give an overview of what's your take on this issue. So I'd like the speakers to first of all give a brief overview of how they understand this issue before we dive into the questions and get responses from them as well. So Mr. Charles, over to you.
Yes, I think this is in terms of legal, in terms of a government trying to enforce a large platform, and in particular, because we are talking about Apple and Apple's iPhone, basically is used by a lot of people in the world, and it's very widely used. And the first point that I think of that makes this particular order from the UK government arguably more serious than even some of the other possible previous attempts by governments to get a backdoor from some communications platform. For example, instant messaging communications platforms like maybe WhatsApp, maybe Telegram or Signal and so on. This, in a way, is even more serious because you are talking about the storage of all the information on your phone on iCloud. So arguably, that would even include a lot more information that, like Godsway already mentioned, and also including all your pictures, communications, record, maybe some of your personal data, maybe including some of your financial data and so on. So in that sense, this is very serious. And my understanding is that the UK order also include, they request Apple to provide this kind of information on a global basis. So in that sense, it is actually also transnational. So it is also going to set I think, a dangerous precedence for other countries to potentially follow. And I do think that other countries are actually looking at this particular issue because the world is, many other countries are also facing or considering similar kinds of regulations. Now, having said all these, I think we also have to understand that governments are also under a lot of pressure. Law enforcement in many countries are under a lot of pressure because of many of the problems that exist in cyberspace, including one aspect that they often talk about, which is child pornography and child safety. And also, they often talk about these days the growing problem of cyber scam all over the world, which is a real and serious problem. So I think when we in the technical community talk about this issue, we also have to acknowledge the importance of finding ways together with other communities, including maybe law enforcement, to find better solutions. But we have to also explain to them that getting a backdoor and bypassing encryption is a bad idea. It doesn't really solve their problem. It may even create other problems or make the existing problems even worse. And maybe later on we will get into some of the more technical perspective about that reason. But I think other speakers will also give us some points about how this will affect uh, not only the common users, but in particular human rights activists, journalists, people that need protection because they need to have encryption to prevent their private communications from being exposed to other people, and in particular, very possibly being exposed to government. Because and again, we're not just talking about one government, because there are also many governments in the world that may have a strong interest in getting into the personal data or the information on our devices, or that exist in cyberspace for a variety of reasons that we have to be worried about. So in the end, I just want to close by saying that this is a serious matter that we have to seek a balance between public security versus personal privacy and personal safety. Uh, Maybe we will have a chance later on to come back to the question of why maybe this is even a bad idea for national security, because that was one of the questions in the questionnaire. But I may defer that to later. But I just want to say that we are still awaiting the development in this particular case, because my understanding is that a U.S. court, a court in the U.K., a U.K. court in London is looking at this particular matter and deciding what to do. And I think it is also said to be a secret court. That means the proceeding, the discussion for the appeal filed by Apple is carried out in secret. Now some of the other constituents, including, I believe, some of the child safety organizations and so on, are requesting that the proceeding be open. Now, I do not exactly have the details of the legal situation, so I don't want to comment whether or not a secret trial or open trial, which would be better. But I just think that we have to continue to follow the case and see whether the UK government, or because of the court, whether or not the government will be forced to change its mind, or maybe it really have a second thought about what it's trying to do. We will have to monitor the situation very closely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Charles, for that insight. So briefly, Farzan, please, let's hear from you. So briefly, what is your take on this issue, and how does this mandate impact the broader global fight, for digital privacy and security? What do you think about that?
Thank you, Godsway, and hi everybody. Welcome, and I'm very excited to be here. So one of the arguments that governments, and this is not limited to the UK government, that governments around the world make the claim that by implementing backdoors, they're going to bring safety and online safety to the users and to their citizens. And this is not true. Backdoors are actually the shortcut to online harms. What is very important to know is we keep talking about balancing, but encryption actually contributes to online safety. Encryption, when you have encryption, you can, like, the journalists can protect themselves, the whistleblowers can protect themselves, and kids can protect themselves. And what by eroding privacy through fighting with encryption, we are going to have disproportionate measures for bringing online safety. And I think that we need to change this narrative that privacy and encryption, especially, is against online safety. It actually brings online safety. And if we want to, and through mass surveillance, Hannah Arendt has a very interesting quote that like it goes along the way that whenever people long for simple solutions to complex problems, totalitarianism will always be a threat. And that's exactly what we are seeing here. And we have been seeing it for many, many years. And with these attempts to weaken encryption for safety, it's a seductive narrative. Scan the messages and the cloud and all the information through a backdoor. But child safety is not simple. Abuse is not simple. We can reach for simple answers that leads to mass surveillance and disproportionate mechanism at the expense of the users that we want to protect online. It's a paternalistic way of going about things. And I think we are going to talk about solutions a little bit later. But I have to say that Ofcom and other regulatory agencies have been very careful when it comes to Online Safety Act to bring safety to the users, and but not to touch encryption, because it is a disproportionate measure. And as Charles mentioned, we need to think about also how can it actually contribute to national security. How can encryption actually protect national security? How can encryption protect online safety? So it is a bad idea, and it will. And I don't know why the governments always go to these simple solutions. Maybe we should provide alternatives for them. Maybe instead of balancing, we should say, okay, so we need to have more proportionate measures for your good faith protection and online safety missions. And those alternatives actually exist, which I will talk about during the solution section. I think there's a solution segment of this panel, right? I will talk about that later.
Sure. Thank you so much, Farzaneh, for that insight. So briefly from Callum, if you can let us hear your take on the issue, and also let's look at some alternative solutions that you think exist for balancing security concerns when it comes to user privacy.
Yeah, thank you, Godsway. And yeah, I agree with the comments from my colleagues. I think maybe one part that I would really zoom in on once again is the secret nature of this technical capability notice. I mean, we see encryption threats from governments around the world, but normally they are much more in the open. They collect feedback, their submissions, calls for evidence. So, actually the technical community, civil society, the public, they can very openly kind of debate and address these issues and raise concerns. Because this is a secret in nature, that whole aspect was removed. And I think that's really dangerous in the sense that it really will break down, I think, trust in encryption and trust in the internet in general. Because I can understand for the average person, for the public, you're wondering, okay, we learned about Apple because there was a leak, this secret notice was leaked to the press. But are there other, encrypted platforms that also received this request and maybe we don't know about them? We don't know if it's true or not, right? So this really, I would say, erodes trust in the system, trust in the technology. And so in that way, it's even more damaging than some of the other encryption threats we see around the world. And I think we'll talk about those more later, right, Godsway? So I won't go into them now. And, what the UK has done is all according to law. It's within the legal framework of the UK. So we mentioned the Investigatory Powers Act. This has been nicknamed the Snoopers Charter. It was originally in 2016, but it was amended last year to actually extend the powers that the UK government has. So the secret nature of the TCN, the Technical Capability Notice, that's within the legal framework. And so the fact that we knew about Apple was just a leak to the press. And then, as Charles mentioned, also now we see it goes to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is once again secret. We don't know the discussions happening there. And there has been a lot of pressure from civil society. So, for example, there was a recent letter from UK groups, Big Brother Watch, Index on Censorship, Open Rights Group, asking for the outcomes of those discussions at the tribunal to be public. So, yeah, again, just to emphasize that the secret nature of this, I think, is especially damaging. And then the second part I wanted to hone in on, because I don't think we mentioned it yet, is the internet fragmentation. I mean, of course, Charles talked about the extraterritoriality, about other governments around the world being inspired by this and maybe passing similar legislation and giving similar notices. But even in the UK, we already see fragmentation because Apple actually did not fully comply with the requests they received. They announced that they would not be making a backdoor. But what they did do is that they pulled their product from the UK market. So this product is called Advanced Data Protection. And basically, this is no longer on offer for UK Apple users anymore. So, what this means is that UK users have a decreased security options available to them, and their experience of the internet would be different than Apple users in other countries. So, this is already a fragmented experience of the internet that we're seeing. Of course, not chosen by Apple, but them responding, of course, to the pressure that they were put under by the UK government. So I think I wanted to emphasize those two things that make this threat unique. Yeah, the secret nature, but also the internet fragmentation thing that we're seeing. And do you want me to talk about alternative solutions, Godsway, or we?
Yes, please. If you can briefly highlight one or two, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one issue here is governments looking at circumvention of encryption as kind of techno-solutionism. So, as I think Charles and Farzaneh both said, we're talking about societal issues, child sexual abuse. In France, it's about the narcotics trade. In Sweden, it's organized crime. These are societal issues. But there is the belief that there should be a technical silver bullet to kind of solve this very easily and completely. And unfortunately, that probably doesn't exist. So it is things like investing in law enforcement capabilities to do investigative, undercover, investigations. More data is not always the answer. There was the watchdog in the UK that exposed that, if I'm remembering correctly, currently when the UK law enforcement agencies receive information about child abuse, it takes them 18 months to respond. I believe the number was 18 because they don't have enough capacity. So, does more data actually result in the intended outcome? But other alternatives, if we look at the tech, things that companies already could do better, it's things like user reporting. There is legal material on those platforms. It's a bit controversial. Some support, some don't, but it's true that some platforms already use metadata to try to identify accounts that circulate illegal material on volume and things like this. So yeah, just pointing to a couple of them. But I'll leave it there, I think, so that others can talk more.
Great. Thank you so much, Callum, for that insights, and I really appreciate. So anyone who heard it right, UK really has the right to demand for that backdoor is part of their legislative governance, if I'm right. Yeah, so we all know, we now know that, yes, they didn't just request for it, but it's part of their laws that they can request for technology services to provide the backdoor. But as at when it is right or not, that is what we are currently fighting against, so they could, find a way for it. So now, Mr. Charles, let's come back to you. Let's focus on some technical aspects. So looking at from the cybersecurity perspective, how do backdoors weaken encryption? And also what real world risks do they pose? And following up with that, we can also look at, what role should, cybersecurity professionals play in advocating for, or against such policies? Thank you so much.
Well, I thought, long time ago, when I was still writing software and so on, and I thought that if you want to create a system that is 100% foolproof, no way that anyone can break in, right? Then there should not be a door, right? So I create a box, and this box is 100%, no back door, no front door, no any door, right? But once you introduce the concept that you want to allow someone to have, well, first of all, you create a backdoor. And then what that means is you have to give a key to somebody. That weakens the whole concept. And the and in reality, when we think about these online system, we are looking at the same kind of scenario. So a backdoor is, basically what we call a hidden entry point that the standard encryption that should apply will be bypassed. So once an attacker find out about the backdoor, and I can almost guarantee, either by leakage or on purpose, or there are always, even in law enforcement, there may be some bad elements or whatever, or even if it was just discovered by an attacker, which I'm afraid sooner or later for these systems it will happen. That would completely compromise the security of the original design. Now, the other thing is, I mean, this is very similar to what happens in the real world. If you have a key, that means you have to have assigned authority. Who has the key? Who can use the key? Nobody can make a copy of it, or who can make a copy of it, and so on. Now, if you have a key, that means that you will always also create the complexity of the key management system. Now, that is also another potential point of weakness. And in many cases, because you are creating a system that would allow bypassing encryption, that usually will mean also the level of encryption that you provide in your algorithm will be made lower. And so it is by design less secure. So all of these things combined means that the system is less secure, and the system, in any circumstances, will be easier to be hacked. And just like Callum and also mentioned, the 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 when a company like Apple pull this advanced encryption, advanced protection product out of the whole of UK, that means everybody suffer. It is not just those people who need it, that they don't have the encryption to use anymore. It's actually everyone, whether you think you need it or not. So that really, I mean, is another factor that I think we should think about. And because of the fact that these systems, once they are weakened, it would also create a reputational damage to the vendor, to the company. So I think that is why, in this case, Apple may not have a choice because it is so entrenched. I doubt that they would say that we're not selling iPhones in the country anymore, or stop the service of iCloud in the country altogether. That's probably not an option. So that's particular step that they are taking right now may be the only one that they can think of. But for some other companies, in similar situation, for example, when the UK online safety bill was passed last year, there were talks about companies such as Signal, which said that they will pull out of the UK market if this law comes in, when this law comes into effect, or when the law enforcement begins to enforce it, and so on. We haven't quite, I think, seen that happening yet, but we would not be surprised if this become a trend in certain countries, that some of these platforms may choose, instead of weakening the system, or weakening the system as a whole, or weakening the system in some particular countries, they choose to just take it off the shelf in those countries. And obviously that would limit consumer choice and also consumer protection in the sense that their access to a highly secure system may be limited in those countries. As a side effect of the government trying to protect everyone, it actually is going to make the protection for everyone even lesser. And that's the irony of the situation.
Great, Charles, for that insight. And please follow up if you could maybe briefly, tell us what should the cybersecurity professional, or which role should they play to be able to advocate for such, policies? Because
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they should try to explain it in more human understandable terms. Number one, to the community, but of course they also need to explain it in very technical terms to the technical community so that they understand it as well. So I think it's a joint effort for the technical community to try to tell people what the reality is. Again, I mean, it may be a real situation that in face of certain threats of crime, of child sexual materials, and these issues like that, that law enforcement believe, or government and politicians as well, believe that there's no other alternative. And I think we should tell them the serious side effect of this particular kind of approach. Technical community should, and cyber security professionals should tell them about it, why encryption is a good idea. And I actually will come back to this later on if we have time, about why this is a good idea even for national security. But I don't want to keep on going. So maybe I'll turn the time back to you first, Godsway.
Great. I think I'll keep that question for you, and I'll get back to you on that aspect as well. Thank you so much. So as we rightly note from Charles' comments, it's our responsibility to break down those technicalities so that people could get the in and out of what exactly is happening. So that is what exactly we are doing here now. And thank you so much, Charles, for bringing out that. So now, Farzaneh, let's briefly look at, turning now to, let me say, the digital rights aspect. How does this policy affect marginalized societies, journalists, and also activists? What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Godsway. And as well as journalists in vulnerable communities, it can also affect the very people that we want to actually keep safe online. And that includes kids. And this is a very important point that that we need to really bring home. So how does this affect people? So there's disproportionate risk. Vulnerable communities rely more heavily on encryption because they face threats from both state and non-state actors. Weakening encryption disproportionately exposes them. And I'm not talking about authoritarian countries. At this stage, we are not really here to define authoritarianism through a country-based approach. We are here to discuss authoritarianism through context. Like what a government can be democratically elected, but do stuff that erodes democracy and weakens the due process. And we need to provide encryption for people that want to protect themselves. Also, this kind of authoritarianism, we see it in when kids that live in abusive families, and by eroding encryption and by having backdoors, we actually enable those oppressors and those abusers. Another problem is the chilling effect. Even the perception that encryption is no longer trustworthy causes people to self-censor, disengage, or stop organizing. Civic space is going to be weaker. And again, around the world, not just in the UK or Europe or like authoritarian regimes. Another problem is Charles mentioned this, is the cross-border impact. It just like the UK ambitions doesn't only impact people in the UK. The internet is like we have to also think about systems and how these tech corporations do things.
Recording stopped.
Tech corporations actually want to do they want to have a consistent mechanism that can afford bringing their service to everyone in the world in some tech corporations. And then when we think
Recording in progress.
When a government requests a backdoor, then other governments request backdoors, and then the tech corporation decides, okay, well, I am going to normalize backdoor, and I'm going to provide this backdoor thing to as many countries as I want to provide service for. We have to consider the global nature of the internet when we are focusing on bringing online safety and also bringing the connectivity to users. And what surprises me is that every time these like UK is a country that has been claiming all along that they are for the global internet, they are for preserving the global internet and cross-border data flow. But by these initiatives that would erode that kind of like security and privacy that we want to afford for everyone in the world, they are going to weaken that notion of global internet. And I'm done, Godsway.
I'm not sure if we lost Godsway at some point.
Godsway is here, but can you hear us, Godsway?
Recording in progress.
Okay. Maybe we can keep going.
Sorry, I had an internet challenge.
Okay.
Yes. Please, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Can you hear us? It seems maybe Godsway don't hear us, can't hear us.
Okay, I'm in now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. Farzaneh, I know I lost you along the line, but that is fine. Thank you so much for that insight. And please, if you could follow up to what I asked you earlier, what are some of the legal and policy-based actions that civil society organizations can take to push back, these policies or these actions?
Oh yeah, so I didn't. I'm gonna be brief because I've been talking for so long. But encryption is a human rights tool. It's a tool that enables asserting human rights, freedom of expression, privacy. We need to yes, of course, there are many harmful activities going on tech platforms and tech companies. But what we need to acknowledge is that it's not through weakening encryption that we can bring safety to people. And another is that, so in many jurisdictions, courts have struck down mass surveillance. And I think that civil society should stand against this. People that want to do like online safety, trust and safety practitioners should be on our side to protect encryption, because mass surveillance is against safety. So we have to change this narrative that if you want safety, you have to give up some of your privacy. That should not be the narrative anymore. And of course, we do coalition building and And, Internet Society has this global encryption group that has many people involved and civil society and digital rights activists, as well as technical people. So my last point is about how do we also the law enforcement. I think that we should explain to the law enforcement, but as well as explaining the tech platforms and tech companies, they have to say what other things they are doing that is bringing online safety to people. And also, when they receive a request from a law enforcement, they have to treat the request seriously and explain the reasons why they cannot disclose a piece of information. And another thing that I want us to be very careful about is like this holistic approach. The societal problems don't just come from
Recording
the tech
stopped.
platforms. The societal problems actually
Recording in progress.
has multiple angles. And by just focusing on getting a backdoor and evidence and multiple things that erode people's human rights and not make them and not enable them to assert their human rights, we cannot solve the problem. Yes, of course, it's a band-aid solution, like take it down and then we are good. But do we really protect children like that? Do we protect vulnerable communities? I think we lost Godsway again. So that's it. Okay, Godsway is back. Okay, Godsway, I'm done.
I think I've made you talk enough, and that's all what you shared have been a good one, even though I was just jumping in and out because of my internet. That is great. Thank you so much, Farzaneh, for sharing that. And let's move to Callum. Callum, so I think from the policy perspective, let's look at, how does the UK action compare with global trends in encryption policy?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take that one. So, the way I would describe this recent UK action, I would say it's a very crude technique, very rough. And the reason for that is, if we compare the UK approach to others around the world, it seems to be something a little bit from the past. And the reason for that is that, encryption backdoors have been discussed for a long time. The concept, of course, is that you create a key that gives the government access. But because the technical community has been so vocal in the past decade or so, talking about the risks of backdoor access with these extra keys, most governments would have said that this is a no-go. That a classic backdoor is really risky for all the reasons that Charles and Farzaneh shared about, creating vulnerabilities that third parties can exploit, including, foreign nations as well to conduct espionage and so on. So, in many cases, we thought that this very crude kind of old-fashioned backdoor was off the table for most governments. And instead, what we were seeing was kind of, I would call them like more sophisticated, new reinventions of backdoors. So an example would be actually the debate happening in France now. Maybe some of you are following it. But they have an issue in France, a real issue, which is about the sale of narcotics and organized crime through criminal networks. And so in France, what they're talking about is a requirement that basically tech platforms would need to hand over decrypted data within 72 hours of receiving a request from law enforcement. And so the way that they're discussing that providers could comply with it is called the Ghost Protocol, which is basically that within a messaging environment, imagine WhatsApp or Signal or so on the law enforcement's request, the provider would insert a third party, the law enforcement, for example, into your conversation, converting it from a one-to-one chat to a group chat, but they would suppress the notifications so that you don't find out. So basically, you wouldn't know that this third party, this ghost, was in the conversation with you. So that's what I mean when I talk about more sophisticated kind of proposals. Like the UK one is really rough, and the French one, it also has many issues. It's it also has security weaknesses that the technical community has been pointing to, and is politically very unpopular because people don't like the idea of a ghost kind of lingering in your chat conversations without your knowledge. But still, it is more sophisticated. Or, elsewhere in Sweden, we're seeing now a proposal also trying to combat organized crime. Again, there's a requirement that providers need to store all messages sent by their users. And here we actually see a parallel case where Signal has threatened to leave the Swedish market if this law gets passed. So in a way, it's kind of similar to the protest that Apple conducted. So those are a couple active pieces of legislation. But then if we look to the European Union, there's something even more, I would say, sophisticated, or like, let's say, fresh and new, which is the concept of client-side scanning. So this is being debated under the frame of the European Child Sexual Abuse Regulation. And basically, this is still active legislation. It's still being discussed in the council. So, they haven't landed on anything yet. But the idea of client-side scanning is that some sort of technology would be embedded on our devices, so on our phones or our laptops or so on. And this technology would be scanning our message contents before we send the message. So policymakers, the reason I say this is more sophisticated, policymakers can say that this is not interfering with the encryption because it happens before the encryption process begins. So they say, the encryption is still protected. We're just scanning before the encryption
Recording
starts.
in progress.
Which is accurate, but it's a little bit disingenuous because then, of course, the purpose of encryption is lost. You lost your confidentiality if you're being scanned on your device. But anyway, the idea is that the scans would then be compared against a database of illegal content, potentially limiting it to images, but it could be text also, and trying to find matches with this illegal content. So this is what I mean when I say that, the EU approach is maybe more sophisticated in that it's trying to find this proportionality, even though most from the technical community would still point to the security risks with client-side scanning, that it can be intercepted and so on. The Online Safety Act, which Farzaneh mentioned, also talks a lot about client-side scanning. So it's interesting that the UK goes on both approaches, classic backdoor, but still also client-side scanning through another piece of legislation. And just to make the conversation a little bit more global, we also have threats in other countries. In India, it's the threat of traceability. So this is the idea that the government wants providers to be able to figure out who created a piece of content that was then forwarded through a chain. So they're very worried about fake news, disinformation, misinformation, these types of things. This request from the Indian government is being challenged in the Delhi High Court, so on proportionality grounds and so on. And then similarly in Brazil, there's a lot of debates about intermediary liability, and they're also mostly focused in the court. So yeah, just to say that there are approaches coming from all over the world, but yeah, the UK is maybe the more crude one of these groups. And then the second point I want to make is that this is only one part of the picture, because we actually see a very strong counter trend coming from other governments that I think we haven't talked about yet, and I really want to emphasize. And these are governments that are actually saying that undermining encryption is dangerous and it's really bad for national security. And I'm really thankful that these voices are becoming louder over the past few months. And I think there are three that I'll mention. And the first one is actually the Dutch. The Netherlands. So the Dutch intelligence agency, it's called AIVD. It's basically their national security agency. They commented on the child sexual abuse regulation in Brussels. And what they said was that scanning, client-side scanning, it's an extensive and complex system which is vulnerable to attack, and that therefore scanning is too big of a risk for national security. So this voice was from the Netherlands. In Sweden, we heard something very similar from the Swedish Armed Forces. They said, that these vulnerabilities with scanning can be exploited by third parties. And then the third one I would mention is actually the US, which, the US hasn't always had the best track record with encryption. But now what we hear from CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is that they highly recommend that everyone use a strong end-to-end encryption. And this is following the Salt Typhoon scandal that happened in the US, where 9 US telecom operators were exposed, and it was believed that espionage was conducted by China's Ministry of State Security. So yeah, just to give a few examples of actually governments that are going the opposite direction of the UK and saying that there are dangers with these types of efforts to undermine encryption. But yeah, maybe I leave it there because I know we have so much to discuss.
Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Charles, go ahead.
Do you want to respond,
Yeah,
Charles?
Godsway, I want to follow up on what Callum has mentioned.
Sure.
First of all, I want to go back to my background, where I came from, and share with you some observation and worries and so on. I originally came from Hong Kong, and over there, for a number of years, we have had a different series of protests in Hong Kong, as many of you probably have heard about. And over those, during those protests, whether you are a protester, whether you are a journalist or just anybody, they would always go around and ask each other. And remember that many of these were more than 10 years ago. They would go around and ask each other. None of these people may be technical expert, just simple users. They ask each other what would be an encrypted app. They don't even know maybe what that means, but they know that that would probably keep them safer. Of course, I have to say that in many cases, what happened to them and the communications being discovered by law enforcement is not because the app is encrypted or not. It's because when they were probably picked up by the police, the phone itself was confiscated and the content was discovered that way. So it has nothing to do with encryption. But still, people really want to protect themselves. And I think, number one, that is a right that they have. And also, they would go around and ask people like, oh, is WhatsApp safe? If not, is Telegram safer? Oh, there's something new that is called Signal. Maybe
Recording
we should
stopped.
that, and so on. So I think there's an important point here that I want to point out that in the world, we are not just talking about the UK, or we are not just talking
Recording
about
in progress.
European countries. We are talking about that, in the past, we look for people who are living under authoritarian regimes. They look upon to democratic countries for some degree of moral authority. The reality is, when democratic countries resort to this type of actions, on the one hand, they complain that Huawei system may have backdoors. On the other hand, they demand their own companies to make backdoors in their own systems. When that happens, it is so easy, I've seen it time and time again, for authoritarian governments to come in, and when they change the laws, when they put in these kind of more draconian laws, when they want to do surveillance, they justify themselves by saying that, well, the US does it, Canada does it, the UK does it, everybody, these are all democracies. They all do it. So I think people in the free world has to understand that and not just, do whatever they want, because they have the luxury of having a better rule of law system, better independent court, and so on. These are the things that I see some of us in the chat were talking about. But when you do that, it may be okay. You said that you need a court warrant or whatever to execute a search or whatever. That may be true. And I'm not even trying to challenge whether or not, even in some democratic countries, even that kind of system may have certain loopholes to be abused by law enforcement. I'm not even talking about that. But the simple fact that what you do in your countries have a big effect on other countries. I wonder if there is a moral authority or a moral responsibility there. And back to quickly the point about national security, I think I completely echo what Callum said about the US And I would not repeat that because it was so funny that on the one hand, Congress people were trying to take away encryption, even though in the U.S. system it's probably much harder to pass a law than in Europe, so they didn't succeed. But on the other hand, after hacking by China, they came around and say that, oh, maybe everybody should use encryption. I mean, that's so ironic. And finally, I just also want to say that if you want to see a place with no encryption, and if you don't need to look very far, all you need to look is China, because in China, encryption is basically illegal. All of their systems made by their tech companies, their platforms, and so on are completely unencrypted. Why? Because the government feels like they have a right to surveil on their own people. So if that is the society that you want to imitate, I mean, I hope not.
If I can pick up Godsway, one aspect, this international thing that Charles talked about. Well, first of all, I lived in China when I was a child, so I grew up without encryption, and that's why I care so much about this now and why I do this work. You know, I experienced life without encryption, and it's very tough for many people. But to talk about this international pressure, you know. There's been a huge response to the UK actions. Maybe people are not aware of this, but especially from the US, which is that when the leaders, Trump and Starmer from the two countries, they had a meeting, and I wrote down Trump's quote, and Trump said, we told them you can't do this. We actually told him, Starmer, that's incredible. This sounds very like Trump. That's something, that you hear about from China. So even when you have Trump mentioning this, it's a very clear kind of signal. But then you also had a letter from U.S. senators asking the UK to make the hearing public, saying that this needs input from technical experts and needs to be transparent and so on. You had the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, talking about how the UK cannot make demands that would impact the data of US citizens, just like the US cannot make demands that would impact the data of UK citizens. So this kind of cross-border aspect, it's very much into the discussion. And finally, it calls into question the Cloud Act, which is the bilateral agreement between various countries when it comes to sharing data with US allies. So you see, the US response is very strong to what the UK has done. And then on the other side, you have the EU now talking about the data adequacy agreement between the EU and the UK. Can EU data continue to flow to the UK if it's not protected under the rules of GDPR? This is something that the UK fought very hard to retain after Brexit and so on. So just to say that, there are repercussions in the kind of international diplomacy world for these types of decisions. And it's because we work in a global network. A decision in one country impacts everyone around the world. So it's not in a vacuum that these things operate, as Charles was saying. We maybe lost Godsway. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
My internet, want to kind of disturb today, but all the same, is a good one. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And, as we look forward to wrap up, so we've had a great discussion so far, and now we'd like to also hear from. I can see in the chat a lot of comments going on, a lot of I was not even unable to keep track of some of the questions, but but I see Farzaneh and others also responded to some of the questions, which is a good one. So let's hear from our participants as well. So please, if you have a question or you have any comment to make, kindly raise your hand and you'll be called upon to answer. And please, if you have a question, please do me the honor to put it back again if you can't speak, or use the Q&A section. So Nicholas, over to you. Kindly go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Godsway, and thank you, everyone. Very great discussions and high-level topics. I have a question for Callum, actually, on the client side scanning, because as a technician, I think you can have a list of MD5, like these hashes of harmful data out there that is known, a pedophile, I don't know, any other harmful content to prevent children, right? But you can check these lists like on the device level. Maybe you don't need to send the data to the server, but just check locally in the device. So that kind of solution, I think that could be good. So the app will prevent you to send that harmful content to the person before you did, right? I didn't hear like this approach, but I would like to know if you have heard or what are the arguments of that client side scanning is a bad idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this, Nicholas. So actually, Internet Society, we have a paper that we published. I will share it in the chat after I finish speaking, but it's called preemptive scanning in end-to-end encrypted environments, I believe, but I'll send the link. And basically, yeah, as you said, the scanning, it can be done with processing on device or off device. So, there's different options for how the scanning could actually be built, but there are security risks with both options. So when it's on device, one thing that people are worried about is reverse engineering, that actually, people could quite easily figure out how this whole scanning and hash matching is occurring, and they could circumvent it more easily, by reverse engineering this process. But then if the processing is off device, there's other risks like, interception of the alerts being sent, but also the databases themselves. How are they governed? There's not one database, there's many around the world. So how are they protected so that actually attackers are not compromising these databases to add in new content to scan for, or overwhelm it with false positives so that the system crashes, in a form of attack. So anyways, I'll share this paper, but we identify several kind of cybersecurity risk issues, both for on-device and off-device processing of the scan. So that's one part. And then the other part is when we think about proportionality, and actually would this work for what the legislation in the EU, I'll use the EU as example, is trying to address. So, in the EU, they're talking about, okay, maybe scanning would be allowed, but it would only be allowed on images, not on text, because they don't want to interfere too much on freedom of expression. It's like, okay, but then people could very easily circumvent this. One way is just that you put your image into a PowerPoint and share the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoints are not allowed to be scanned. So, you don't have to be super sophisticated to actually circumvent this type of scanning technology. And that's not even to mention people that could encrypt the images on their device before they send it to the messaging services. So, there's the 2 points there. It's the cybersecurity aspect, and I'll share the link, but then also, would this actually help when it's so easy to circumvent these types of measures? So I hope it answers your question.
Thank you, Callum, for that answer. That's a brilliant one.
Godsway, I actually also have a question similar to follow on. I remember when some time ago, actually, exactly the same company, Apple, was proposing something like device scanning, right? But one of the things that I thought I heard from the community at the time that they were concerned was that people would have the perception that you are installing a piece of malware on my phone or on my devices, and they would be worried that there might be other functions that they are not aware of, or even law enforcement are not aware of, or maybe there would be other it would become a form of surveillance, either by the company or by other actors. So what do you think about that? Is that a legitimate concern?
It's a question for me, Charles.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Got you. No, actually, you make a great point, because in the UK, there's a big discussion about scanning under the Online Safety Act, which Farzaneh also mentioned. And some researchers, they shared their fear that facial recognition could be submitted, built into the scanning technology itself. So I think there is this kind of, fear about you create the technology and then how is its use actually morphed over time, maybe without the knowledge of the user, how can it be abused and so on. So I think you're right that this is a concern that a lot of people have is, is the original purpose then manipulated? Is there scope creep? And then what does that mean for the users that already allowed this system onto their device on the first place? Does that answer your question? I think I got it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so please, another question in the chat states that what do you think, or what do you think could trigger this backdoor mandate request from UK for all Apple user? Or what is UK privacy law saying about such a request? Please, who could take that? I think Callum should take that, yes.
It's secret. I mean, we don't know the motivation for the backdoor. That's something they don't share. They say it's for national security reasons and that it's highly sensitive information, and therefore that's why the tribunal is secret and so on. So we actually don't know the specific motivation. We know that the Home Office from the UK, they've mentioned child safety a few times, so we might assume it's somehow connected to child sexual abuse material, but no, we don't know for sure. We just know it's in relation to national security. So it's a black box of the exact motivation.
Okay, thank you so much. Another one in the Q&A chat says that how does this UK request affect non-governmental organizations advocating for the rights of marginalized women or groups in developing countries seeking grants and support from UK? The possibility of influencing these developing countries is doing same. So I think any comments on that aspect? Who would take that?
I think the first thing that similar to what I mentioned in the last round, not to put down any developing country, but I would worry that in many of these countries, there may not be as a robust legal system, and the potential for abuse and surveillance will become much higher. That's the first thought that I have. If these other countries would try to follow. And technically, many of these smaller countries, whether or not they will have the capability to really do the right thing, to the extent that maybe I shouldn't say do the right thing, but to the extent of protecting against unintended consequences, I would worry that some countries may not be as prepared as some others. So that would also be a big worry for me.
Okay, thank you so much. Charles, this brings me back to you on the issue of, one of the reasons why UK is demanding for this is that it's necessary for national security. What do you have to say about that? What is your concern about that?
Well, I think I talked
reminded.
Sorry?
I think I've reminded you about this question. You were supposed to, I think.
Yeah. Because I thought I already kind of talked about it, because Callum also talked about it also, because the irony is that when you say that this is a national security issue, in fact, more and more countries are coming out to say, as Callum mentioned, that they actually realize that having encryption on your phone, on your devices, or your applications, not just the phones, is actually a good thing, because otherwise it will become much easier for organized attack that are becoming more and more common as a form of gray zone attack or a kind of tactical attack from certain countries that is happening more and more in our daily lives. That telecom companies are targeted, citizens are targeted, or maybe on a very mass scale. So that, in fact, is having encryption is actually a way to protect against this type of behavior by certain national actors. So you see more and more national agencies, security agencies coming out, intelligence agency coming out to say that encrypted apps and devices are what they would recommend, not only their own employees, but maybe the general public to use. So that is a clear sign that national security is actually, encryption actually support safer or better national security.
Okay,
Callum.
Callum, go ahead.
If I can respond also, even within one single government, you'll have different pressure points, right? So you might have law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement always asks for more access, right? It will make their job easier. They've asked for decades. It's status quo. They will always be asking, right? Meanwhile, they're trying to address those societal issues, the like crime within the country. But then the national security agencies increasingly, are worried about, those online attacks and the security of the country itself. So these can be in opposition. And I think really our focus, we shouldn't waste, my personal opinion, we shouldn't waste too much of our energy trying to fully convince law enforcement to stop asking for access. They will always ask. You need to go to the policymakers. Their job is to be proportional, to take in all the views, to look at the full picture, national security plus law enforcement plus rights, they need to make this proportionality kind of assessment, right? So this is where we should focus a lot of our attention, my personal view. It's great if we can have law enforcement understanding our concerns and so on and asking for more measured access, but what the decades have shown us is that they're always going to ask. Just to say that even within a single government, there can be this big divide.
Okay, thank you so much, Callum, for sharing that insight. So please, let's take out the last question in the chat. We are out of time. Given that a backdoor in Apple's encryption would introduce a single point of failure, potentially exploitation by both state and non-state actors, how can the government justify this request without compromising the security of all users? And also, are there any alternative solutions that balance national security concerns with user privacy? Farzaneh, you want to take that?
So to be honest, I think Deborah kind of put it so well. It cannot justify it. It's the disproportionate measure. And to be very clear, and I see it in chat that people are arguing that there should be both sides on in these discussions, and these are community meetings. We are just facilitators. We discuss, we answer questions. But anytime that anybody wants to bring another perspective, they should feel free to do so, to raise their hand, to discuss. And but these are the meetings that we actually do fairly quickly, and we invite people who are members of the SIG. So I understand that we might not bring on the panelists so many diverse perspectives, but people should feel free to raise their hand and discuss. So one of the things that I think that Deborah puts it so well, that the government cannot really justify this. And time again, they go to court and they challenge these decisions and they win. But there will be at some point that the court kind of says, okay, well, no, maybe encryption, maybe we need to have mass surveillance. And in some jurisdiction, it happens because the court is not independent. It's a defender of the regime, and democracy is a very fragile thing. It's a very even in very democratic countries, if there's somebody in charge that wants to challenge all of those safeguards that you have to protect and save people, then they can. And by arguing that we need backdoor and we need to trust our government because it's democratic, we are going to face crisis when somebody in that democratic process wants to challenge all of the norms and democratic norms that we have. So I think that we should be ready and we should protect people through encryption, through arguing for encryption. And for law enforcement, I don't know, as Callum said, law enforcement has been asking for access to data and backdoors for since forever. It was only maybe last year that I remember that the EU police force, several EU countries' police, they issued a statement about encryption and how it affects their work and how this technology should not be sometimes even used. And there are reports after reports about that. What we should do is to bring law enforcement on our side. And I have this kind of I think maybe it's too ambitious, but I think that we should create advocates for encryption for law enforcement, and also change this mentality that because the data is there, I want to have access to it so that it makes my life easier. No, there should be more innovative law enforcement approaches and investigative approaches so that we can have protection when our democratic values are being tested during political turmoil anywhere in the world. It's I don't want to name countries, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Farzaneh. So this calls for us to keep advocating. Let's not just say it's the government, so let's allow them to win. Let's get our voices up there. We also have something to say to curb that action so that we'll not always allow the government to win against us. Sometimes governments might also be wrong. So let's keep pushing. Okay, so Farzaneh, I think just since you're on the spot, maybe you can briefly just give us some key takeaways that our participants could take home, just briefly. I think we have about 5 minutes to end this session. So just any key takeaway you would like to give our participants?
Yeah, so actually, Delphi said something really important. It is not just law enforcement who can access unencrypted data. Keep this in mind. And we have said, the moment you have backdoors, the moment you take away encryption, you enable those criminals and the abusers to have access. And there was some discussion in the chat which said that, oh yeah, well, maybe encryption is not as ironclad as you think. That's another issue that we need to also discuss. But for further takeaway for me here is that, I think Georgia Osborne also mentioned this, we have to be very clear on why encryption matters, why it actually provides safety, and how can law enforcement, through alternative methods, can do its job. And just because the data is there, the government should not have access to it for their investigative processes.
Wow, thank you so much, Farzaneh, for that insight. I really appreciate it. Callum, over to you, please. A brief takeaway.
I'll be super brief, just to reiterate the points that, the UK is the outlier. It's really the most extreme that we're seeing now when it comes to this approach. And if they had gotten their way with the backdoor that was done secretly, they would have put the security of users around the world at risk. So yeah, just to make this point again, but to give a little bit more hope that, as I said, there is a changing tide. There are many countries that are acknowledging the risks of circumventing encryption. So I think we as a community really need to elevate these voices. We need to make sure that people hear what the Netherlands is saying, what Sweden, the national security agencies are saying, but also, the US. So make sure that this message is loud and clear. And then the third thing I would say is just to get back to the issue, because I saw in the chat, some discussion about sensitivity to the issues. I mean, when we're talking about online safety, we actually need legislation that will work. We don't want something that's just techno-solutionist that looks like the government did this huge thing, breaking encryption, getting access. But I mean, if criminals can easily circumvent that, it's not actually solving the issue. It's just a flashy thing that looks good for the policymakers. So we need solutions that work, and that probably requires a lot of money for law enforcement, which governments are often not willing to spend. But we have to be realistic about this sometimes. And then third thing I will say is there's plenty you can do. Internet Society, we founded the Global Encryption Coalition. There's over 430 organizational members around the world. I put the link. You're welcome to join if you're not already there. We recently had an open letter through the coalition that over 239 organizations and experts signed about the UK. It's also in the chat. And then final thing is that we have a letter writing campaign to the UK government. I also put it in the chat, so you as an individual can write a letter to the UK sharing your concerns about the encryption backdoor. So there's plenty of ways to get involved, and we welcome you to join us.
Thank you so much, Callum, for that. Charles, please, over to you.
I just want to say that, first of all, thank you, Godsway, for organizing this, and thanks to the Online Safety SIG for organizing and highlighting the importance of this issue. I also want to say that this is an issue that Internet Society certainly care a lot about and put in a lot of resources, including working with the Global Encryption Coalition and people like Callum and so on. I think that one issue that our technical community, including our chapters, hopefully should care a lot more about. I do see in the chat that some chapters and some of the attendees members, including, for example, in countries like Colombia and so on, has been saying that this is an issue that is increasingly discussed or worried about in their own countries as well. So I think at the chapter level, we should also share some information about what's happening with not only with, well, of course, with Callum and his team, but also among the different chapters. I think we need to do better in terms of sharing knowledge and information to do better. One thing is all the links that has been shared by Callum on the chat. I think after we leave, we usually lose the chat. So maybe you can get all of those over to Godsway. He's the central point for distribution for us here, and he can put it in his Telegram group. Is it Telegram or no?
Yes, we have Telegram, WhatsApp.
It's a Telegram or WhatsApp. Yeah, I keep getting confused which one are you using. But also maybe an email and so on. So all the attendees and others having an interest, and your members of your SIG can all get the same information and link and review them when they have time. So thank you again for organizing this.
Thank you so much, Charles. And I think so. This brings us to the end of our session. Imagine a world where even encryption is enabled, but we still don't trust the process, and a world where encryption has been taken away. We can just imagine how it's gonna be. So, as we wrap up, I would like to thank our incredible panelists for their insights, and also I would like to thank our audience for engaging in this important discussion. We wish to continue, but then time is far gone. And a few takeaways from today and from my side, encryption is a fundamental part of online safety and must be protected. And also governments mandated backdoors create security risks, that affect everybody. And also when we look at civil society, tech companies and policymakers must work together, to resist these measures and to promote stronger encryption. And also I would like to thank all my SIG leadership team for also participating and also contributing to the success of this event. Thank you, everyone. So to get involved, we encourage you to follow Online Safety SIG social media platforms, share today's insights, advocate for encryption protection in your communities and local chapters. Let's not make it end here. It's if you would like to collaborate or contribute to further engagement, please feel free to reach out to us at Online Safety. We will be glad to support you and also assist you. And thank you all for joining. Have a great day, everyone. I really appreciate the time. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.